Have you ever watched someone destroy their own life while thinking they were winning? Because that's exactly what happened the day my sister stole my company. She sat across from me smiling, confident, proud, believing she'd finally beaten me. What she didn't know? In less than 10 minutes, federal agents would walk through that front door, and everything she'd built her entire life would collapse. But before we get into this insane story, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Would you expose your own family if they betrayed you? Trust me, by the end of this story, you're gonna need an answer. I still remember the smell of my mom's dining room that afternoon. Fresh coffee, lemon candles, expensive perfume. Everything looked warm and peaceful on the surface, but underneath, it was a battlefield. I sat quietly at the end of the long oak dining table while my older sister Victoria signed the final ownership papers with a dramatic little flourish, like she was starring in some corporate movie scene. The sunlight caught the diamonds on her bracelet as she pushed the documents toward me with a satisfied smile. "There," she said proudly. "It's official." My mom instantly lit up with excitement. "Oh, thank God," she breathed dramatically. "Now this business is finally in capable hands." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because none of them had any idea what was actually happening. Victoria leaned back in her chair confidently. "Don't take this personally, Emily," she said in that fake sweet voice she always used whenever she was being cruel. "Business just isn't your thing." My brother, Derek, nodded immediately like some brainwashed assistant. "She's right," he added. "You've always been creative, Em, but running a company takes real strategy. Creative. That was the word my family used whenever they wanted to call me stupid without sounding mean." I looked down at the transfer papers calmly. 3 years of planning. 3 years of recordings. 3 years of pretending to be weaker than I actually was. And now? Victoria had finally signed herself directly into a federal investigation. My dad placed a hand on my shoulder like I was a child being comforted after losing a soccer game. "I know this must be hard," he said softly. "But accepting help takes maturity. Accepting help." That phrase almost made me choke on my coffee because Victoria wasn't helping me. She was stealing from me, again. The first time she did it, nobody believed me, and that's where this story really begins. 3 years earlier, I actually trusted my sister. Big mistake. At the time, I'd just landed the biggest client of my career, a fast-growing tech company out of Chicago worth nearly $50,000 annually to my consulting business. For me, that contract changed everything. I wasn't rich, I wasn't flashy, but I'd built my company from nothing while Victoria spent most of her 20s bouncing between finance jobs and pretending she was some corporate genius because she had an MBA. The truth? Victoria cared more about appearances than results. Designer clothes, luxury dinners, social media photos pretending she lived some girl boss CEO lifestyle. Everything about her was carefully curated to look successful, and my parents absolutely worshipped her for it. Meanwhile, I worked quietly. No bragging, no showing off, just results. That drove Victoria crazy. She could never stand the idea of someone succeeding without attention, especially me. One night during a family dinner, I made the mistake of mentioning my new client contract. Nothing detailed, just excitement. I remember Victoria smiling while sipping wine, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a predator makes when it spots something vulnerable. A week later, my client called me sounding confused. "Emily," he said carefully, "there's a woman claiming to be your business partner asking us to redirect future payments." I felt my stomach drop instantly. What woman? Victoria Chin. For a second, I genuinely thought there had to be some misunderstanding, but there wasn't. Victoria had contacted my client behind my back, pretending she had authority over my company. Not only that, she'd attempted to redirect contract payments into a separate business account she controlled. My own sister, stealing from me. When I confronted her, she denied everything immediately. "Oh my God, Emily, you're being paranoid," she laughed. Then, she turned it around on me like she always did. "You're obviously overwhelmed by business stress." Classic Victoria. Deny, manipulate, attack. My parents believed her instantly. Of course they did. Victoria had the MBA. Victoria worked in finance. Victoria understood business. Meanwhile, I was apparently just emotional and insecure. I still remember sitting in my parents' kitchen while my mom looked disappointed in me. "You really need to stop being jealous of your sister," she said. Jealous. That word haunted me for years, because every time Victoria hurt someone, she somehow convinced everybody the victim was just jealous of her success, even when she was clearly guilty. That day changed me permanently. Not because Victoria betrayed me. Honestly, I expected that eventually. What broke something inside me was realizing my family would always take her side no matter what evidence existed. That's when I stopped trying to convince people with emotions and started relying on documentation, proof, evidence, patterns, because feelings can be ignored. Facts. Can't, so instead of fighting Victoria publicly, I did something smarter. I started building a trap. At first, it was just an idea, a fake company, a shell business designed specifically to attract greedy people, especially greedy people who thought they were smarter than everybody else. People like Victoria. I spent months designing everything carefully: fake revenue streams, fake client records, fake growth projections. On paper, the company looked incredibly successful. But legally, it was toxic. Every financial statement contained deliberate fraud indicators. Every document was structured to trigger massive federal violations the moment someone attempted to use them for loans, investments, or financial leverage. Completely unusable, completely illegal, and completely irresistible to the right kind of criminal. I named the business Ashford Strategic Consulting. Sounds impressive, right? That was intentional. Corporate-sounding names make people assume legitimacy. Over the next 3 years, I slowly built the illusion: fake social media presence, fake office photos, fake success stories. Meanwhile, my real business kept growing quietly, in the background under a completely separate entity nobody in my family knew about. That part was important, because Victoria always underestimated me when she thought I was failing, and I needed her arrogant. Arrogant people make mistakes. Every family gathering became part of the operation. Victoria constantly mocked my struggling business. "You still working from home?" she'd ask smugly. "Maybe someday you'll get a real office." Meanwhile, I was literally consulting on fraud investigations for major corporations downtown. My parents never asked questions, never requested proof, never visited my office. They just accepted Victoria's narrative completely, that I was unsuccessful, that I needed help, that I was barely surviving, and honestly, I let them believe it, because sometimes the easiest way to catch a manipulator is to let them feel powerful. The more superior Victoria felt, the greedier she became, and greedy people eventually overplay their hand, exactly like she did that afternoon at my mother's dining table. Back in the present, Victoria zipped her leather portfolio shut confidently. "Well," she said proudly, "starting tomorrow, I'll begin restructuring the company." Restructuring. God, she sounded proud of herself. I'll contact your clients personally, she continued. Reassure them that operations are improving under new leadership. I slowly looked up at her. You should definitely contact them. Something in my voice made her pause, just briefly, a tiny crack in her confidence. What's that supposed to mean? She asked carefully. I smiled slightly. Nothing. But inside, I was counting seconds. Because right on cue, my phone buzzed. The room went quiet. I glanced at the screen. Perfect timing. I stood calmly. Sorry, I said casually. I need to take this. Victoria watched me suspiciously as I walked toward the living room. The second I answered, a professional female voice came through the line. Miss Chin, this is Director Roberts with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I looked out the front window calmly. Yes, I replied quietly. The transfer is complete. And the subject signed willingly? She insisted on it. A brief pause. Then I heard something that almost sounded like amusement in the director's voice. In 20 years investigating financial crimes, she said, I've never seen someone voluntarily assume ownership of a fraudulent entity while believing they were committing theft successfully. I smiled slightly. People get careless when greed makes them feel smart. We're 5 minutes away, she said. Can you keep them there? I looked back toward the dining room, where my family sat completely unaware their lives were about to explode. Oh, I said calmly. They're not going anywhere. I walked back into the dining room slowly, keeping my face completely neutral. Victoria was still watching me carefully. That was one thing about her. She was manipulative, but she wasn't stupid. She could sense when something felt off. What was that about? She asked immediately. I pulled my chair out and sat down calmly. Work call. Her eyebrows pulled together. You don't have work anymore, she said with a smug little laugh. Remember? I own the company now. The way she said it, like she'd finally conquered me, like she'd spent years waiting for this exact moment. I looked directly at her. Right, I answered quietly. You do. My mom reached for her wine glass, completely relaxed now that the paperwork was signed. Honestly, she looked relieved, like transferring my business to Victoria had solved some embarrassing family problem. You know, Mom said, this is probably for the best. Running a business alone clearly became too much pressure for you. Too much pressure. That was the story they'd all accepted. Not because it was true, because it was easier than admitting Victoria might actually be the problem. Derek leaned back, in his chair confidently. So, what happens now? He asked Victoria. She smiled immediately. Well, first, I clean up the financial structure. Financial structure. If only he knew. Then I streamline operations, cut unnecessary expenses, and probably secure additional funding to scale. There it was. Funding. Exactly what the SEC had been waiting for. Victoria noticed me staring at her and smirked. What? She asked. I slowly shook my head. Nothing. I just think it's smart you already have expansion plans. Oh, absolutely, she said proudly. This company has huge potential under competent management. Competent. Management, my dad nodded approvingly. That's leadership. I almost laughed again. The craziest part? Victoria genuinely believed she was the smartest person in the room. That's what arrogance does. It blinds people. She thought she'd manipulated everyone successfully, thought she'd won, thought she'd stolen control of a valuable company from her naive little sister. Meanwhile, every word coming out of her mouth was making the federal case stronger. Then came the sentence that really sealed her fate. I've already spoken with lenders informally, she said casually. With the revenue this company reports, securing capital shouldn't be difficult. I looked down at my coffee cup to hide my expression. There it was. Intent, clear, direct, documented. Derek looked impressed. See? That's business thinking. No, that was felony thinking, and in less than 3 minutes, everybody in this house was about to learn the difference. Victoria crossed her legs confidently. You know what your problem always was, Emily? She asked. I looked up calmly. You think too small. Mom instantly nodded. She does. Victoria pointed toward the transfer papers. This company could have become something huge years ago if you'd stopped acting scared all the time. Scared. Interesting word, because I wasn't scared. Not anymore. 3 years ago? Yeah. Back then, Victoria could still hurt me. Back then, I still cared what my family thought. Back then, I still believed truth mattered by itself. But eventually, you learn. Something important about manipulative people. Truth means nothing without evidence. And once I understood that, everything changed. I became patient, cold, strategic, not emotional, not reactive. That's how you beat people like Victoria. You stop playing defense. You're very quiet, Dad observed carefully. I looked at him. I'm listening, Victoria smirked. She's probably embarrassed. No, I answered calmly. I'm actually impressed. That caught everybody off guard. Impressed? Derek repeated. I nodded slowly. Victoria really committed to this. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned back in my chair. You spent months convincing everybody I was incompetent. You pushed Mom and Dad, constantly. You drafted legal paperwork. You pressured me into signing. Honestly, I smiled faintly. That's commitment. For the first time all afternoon, Victoria looked uncomfortable. You're making this sound bad, she said carefully. I shrugged. Isn't it? Mom rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, please. Nobody forced you to sign anything. Technically true, which made the trap even better, because voluntary fraud is much easier to prosecute. Before anyone could say anything else, the doorbell rang, and suddenly, everything changed. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Ding dong. Nobody moved at first. My mom frowned toward the hallway. Are you expecting someone? Yes, I answered calmly. Victoria looked confused. For me? She asked. I met her eyes. You could say that? Something about my tone made real fear flicker across her face for the first time all day. Mom stood slowly and walked toward the front door. The rest of us stayed seated. I could hear muffled voices from the entryway, then silence, then Mom's voice. Confused, nervous, Victoria? A second later, 4 people stepped into the dining room wearing dark suits and serious expressions. 3 men, 1 woman, badges, briefcases, authority. The air instantly changed. Director Sarah Roberts entered first. Calm, professional, terrifying. The moment Victoria saw the SEC badge, all color drained from her face. Victoria Chin? Director Roberts asked firmly. Nobody spoke. Victoria stood halfway from her chair. Yes? The director opened a folder slowly. I'm Director Roberts with the Securities and Exchange Commission. These are Special Agents Williams, Thompson, and Park. My dad looked completely lost. The SEC? He repeated weakly. Director Roberts nodded once. We're here regarding an active federal investigation involving corporate fraud, securities violations, identity theft, and attempted financial fraud. The room exploded instantly. What? Mom shouted. This has to be a mistake, Derek snapped. Victoria stared at the agents in complete disbelief. Then finally, her eyes locked onto me, and in that exact second, she understood. Not everything, not the full picture, but enough. You, she whispered. I held her stare calmly. Director Roberts continued speaking. Approximately 22 minutes ago, Miss Victoria Chin voluntarily assumed legal ownership and operational control of a corporate entity currently under federal investigation. Dad blinked rapidly. What does that even mean? It means, Director Roberts explained carefully, your daughter signed documentation accepting responsibility for a business engaged in large-scale financial fraud. Mom looked horrified. That's impossible. Emily's business is tiny. I finally spoke. It's not a real business. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Victoria slowly turned toward me. What? I stood calmly. The company you just stole? I paused. It was fake. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the agents stayed quiet. Because this was the moment, the reveal. 3 years of planning finally unfolding exactly the way I imagined. Victoria shook her head slowly. No. Yes, I answered. The entire business was a shell corporation designed specifically to catch financial fraud. Mom looked physically dizzy. You're lying. I'm not. Director Roberts opened another folder. Miss Emily Chin has been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 11 months. Now Derek looked sick. You worked with the government? I work in fraud investigation, I corrected. Calmly, Victoria stumbled backward slightly. No, 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 no. She looked around desperately. This is entrapment. Director Roberts shut that down immediately. No, Miss Chin. Entrapment requires law enforcement coercion. Nobody forced you to seize control of the company. She manipulated me. I finally laughed softly. Manipulated you? Victoria pointed at me hysterically. She pretended to be failing. Yes, I answered calmly. And you tried to exploit it. The room went silent again. Because deep down, everybody knew I was right. Director Roberts placed the transfer documents carefully on the dining table. These papers, she explained, confirm Miss Victoria Chin knowingly assumed full operational control over a company containing falsified financial records. Victoria's breathing became shaky. I didn't know they were fake. You reviewed them, I reminded her calmly. You literally bragged about the revenue projections 10 minutes ago. I thought they were real. And you planned to use them to secure funding, Director Roberts added. Victoria froze. Game over. Because intent mattered, and she'd already confessed it in front of witnesses. Derek looked between us frantically. Wait. Emily, are you saying you built an entire fake company just to catch Victoria? I looked directly at him. No. I paused. I built it to reveal who she really was. Victoria stared at me with pure hatred now. You psycho. Maybe. But psychopaths hurt innocent people. I stopped criminals. Big difference. Agent Williams stepped forward. Miss Chin, we need you to come with us for questioning. Mom immediately panicked. You can't take her. We can, Director Roberts said calmly. And based on the evidence, federal charges are highly likely. Mom grabbed Victoria's arm protectively. She didn't do anything. I slowly pulled out my phone. Yes, she did. Then I pressed play. And suddenly, Victoria's voice filled the dining room. Clear, sharp. Recorded weeks earlier. Once I control the company, I can leverage the revenue numbers for expansion capital. Silence. Then another recording. Emily's too weak to run this business properly anyway. Another. Mom and Dad already agree she should hand everything over. My mother's face went white. Dad looked like he might collapse. And Victoria? She looked terrified, because for the first time in her life, she couldn't manipulate her way out of reality anymore. The recording ended. And suddenly the entire room felt different, heavier. Like all the lies my family had been living inside for years were finally collapsing at once. Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked at each other. Because there's something terrifying about hearing ugly truth out loud. especially when you spent years pretending it didn't exist. Victoria stared at my phone like it had betrayed her personally. Then slowly, her expression changed, the panic disappeared, and anger took its place. Pure anger! You recorded me? She snapped. I held her stare calmly. I documented evidence. That's insane. No, I answered quietly. What's insane is trying to steal from your own sister twice. Mom suddenly stood up. This is getting out of control. Director Roberts looked at her calmly. With respect, ma'am, this situation became serious long before today. Dad finally found his voice. Emily... He sounded completely lost. Is this all true? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. That depends. Depends on what? Do you mean the fraud investigation? I paused. Or the part where Victoria spent years manipulating all of you against me? Dad looked away instantly. That answer alone told me everything. Because, deep down, he already knew. They all did. They just never wanted to admit it. Admitting it meant accepting something painful. Victoria wasn't the successful golden child they'd built their identity around. She was a liar. And worse, they helped her. Victoria suddenly pointed at me aggressively. She's twisting everything. Agent Thompson stepped closer immediately. Miss Chin, calm down. She made this happen, Victoria shouted. She built the fake company. She created fake records. Yes, Director Roberts replied evenly. And those actions alone are not criminal under the circumstances. Victoria looked stunned. What? The crime occurred, Roberts continued, when you knowingly attempted to assume ownership of those fraudulent assets for financial gain. Victoria shook her head desperately. No, you tricked me. I crossed my arms calmly. You were free to walk away at any point. That's not fair. No, I answered. What wasn't fair was trying to steal my client 3 years ago. Mom suddenly turned toward Victoria. You really did that? Victoria froze. Big mistake. Because silence tells the truth faster than words ever can. Dad stared at her in disbelief. Victoria. She immediately switched tactics. Classic manipulator behavior. When denial fails, become the victim. You don't understand, she cried. I was trying to help her. I almost laughed. There it was, the same excuse she always used. Help, control, disguised as concern, the favorite weapon of narcissists everywhere. You contacted my client pretending to be my business partner, I reminded her. You attempted to redirect payments into your own account. Victoria looked frantic now. I was protecting the business. No, I said calmly. You were stealing. Her eyes snapped toward Mom instantly. Mom, say something. But for once, Mom didn't rush to save her, because the recordings changed. Everything. See, manipulation survives in uncertainty. The second proof enters the room. The fantasy starts dying. Derek ran both hands through his hair aggressively. Jesus Christ. He looked at me. You planned this whole thing? Yes? For 3 years? Yes. His face twisted with disbelief. That's completely psychotic. I tilted my head slightly. Interesting. What? You think planning is psychotic? I nodded toward Victoria. But attempted fraud is just a mistake. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you implied. He opened his mouth, then stopped, because he realized I was right. That's the thing about families with toxic dynamics. Everyone gets used to protecting the same person. The manipulator becomes normal. The victim becomes dramatic. And eventually, nobody even notices how twisted everything is anymore, until reality forces them to. Like today, Director Roberts looked through another file. Miss Victoria Chin also submitted preliminary loan inquiries using the company's reported revenue, Mom's head snapped around. You already applied for loans. Victoria looked cornered. It was preliminary. Using fraudulent financial data, Roberts clarified. That constitutes attempted financial fraud. Dad sat down heavily in his chair like his legs stopped working. Oh my God. I watched all of them quietly. Not with joy. Not revenge. Honestly, it felt emptier than I expected, because for years I imagined this moment, the moment everyone finally realized I'd been telling the truth. I thought it would feel satisfying. But mostly, it felt sad. Sad that it took federal agents and criminal evidence for my family to believe me. Sad that love alone was never enough. Sad that I had to build an entire legal operation just to prove I wasn't crazy. Victoria suddenly looked at me, with pure hatred. You ruined my life. I met her stare calmly. No, I shook my head slowly. You ruined your own life the second you decided stealing from me mattered more than loving me. For a second, something flickered in her expression. Not guilt, not regret, just rage. Because people like Victoria never think consequences apply to them. And when reality finally hits, they don't feel remorse. They feel cheated, like the universe broke some secret, promised to protect them forever. Mom started crying quietly. This can't be happening. Director Roberts softened her tone slightly. Ma'am, I understand this is emotional, but your daughter knowingly entered serious financial territory. She didn't understand what she was signing. Victoria immediately nodded desperately. Exactly. I looked directly at Roberts. She reviewed the financial summaries twice. Roberts nodded. We have video confirmation from the office meeting. Victoria's face went white again, because she forgot something important. Rich, manipulative people always assume they're the smartest person recording conversations. They never imagine someone else might be documenting them too. You videotaped? Me, Victoria whispered. The law firm conference room records all client signings, Roberts explained calmly. You verbally confirmed understanding of the company's reported assets before signing. Game over, again. Derek looked physically sick now. This is insane. No, I said quietly. What's insane is how hard everyone worked to convince me I was incompetent. Nobody answered, because they remembered every comment, every insult, disguised as concern. Every time they treated Victoria like a genius and me like a failure. And now? The failure turned out to be a federal fraud investigator, while the genius was facing prison time. Funny how reality works sometimes. Agent Park stepped beside Victoria. Miss Chin, we need to leave now. Victoria backed away instantly. No, I'm calling my lawyer. You're welcome to. This is entrapment. Director Roberts sighed slightly. No court is going to view voluntary corporate theft as entrapment. I didn't steal anything. I finally stood up slowly. The room instantly went quiet again, then calmly. I looked directly at my sister. You spent months convincing everyone I was incapable of running my own company. I took a step closer. You drafted transfer documents. Another step. You manipulated Mom and Dad into pressuring me. Another step. You planned financing based on fake revenue. I stopped directly in front of her. And now suddenly you're pretending you were forced? Victoria's breathing became shaky. You set me up. I leaned closer slightly. No. I said softly. I gave you an opportunity to be honest. The silence after that hit harder than yelling ever could, because everybody understood something in that moment. Victoria could have walked away. At any point, she could have helped me genuinely. Could have supported me. Could have acted like a real sister. Instead, she saw weakness and chose greed. That choice belonged to her, not me. Mom suddenly grabbed my arm. Emily, please. I looked down at her hand. Her voice broke completely. "She's your sister." And there it was, the sentence people always use when they want accountability to disappear. Family. Like blood magically erases harm. I gently pulled my arm free. And I was her sister. Mom cried harder. "This doesn't have to destroy her life." I looked at Victoria quietly. She should have thought about that before committing federal fraud. "You sound cold," Dad whispered. I looked at him. No. I shook my head slowly. "I sound like someone who got tired of being betrayed." That hit him hard. I could see it. Because maybe for the first time, he realized how alone I'd actually been all these years, not just unsupported, outnumbered, every family gathering, every disagreement, every achievement minimized, every concern dismissed. Meanwhile, Victoria kept getting protected no matter what. She did, until today. Today, reality finally became stronger than favoritism, and nobody knew how to handle it. Victoria suddenly lunged toward me. "This is your fault." Agent Thompson immediately grabbed her arm. "Miss Chin, you psycho bitch!" she screamed. "You wanted this? You wanted to destroy me?" The room froze. Even Mom looked shocked, because manipulative people can only fake kindness for so long. Once consequences appear, eventually the mask cracks, and underneath? There's usually rage, pure ugly rage. I looked at her calmly while the agents restrained her. "No, Victoria." I shook my head slowly. "I wanted you to stop." That line hit harder than anything else I'd said all afternoon. Because it was true. Didn't build the trap because I hated her. I built it because I knew she'd never stop otherwise. People like Victoria escalate when they avoid consequences. The first successful manipulation only makes the second one bigger. And eventually, someone gets seriously hurt. Maybe me, maybe a bank, maybe investors, maybe innocent employees, but somebody always pays the price, unless someone stops them first. And I did. Victoria stopped fighting for a second. Not because she accepted reality, because she was finally realizing she couldn't manipulate her way out of it. That was new for her. Her entire life, somebody always rescued her. Mom defended her. Dad excused her. Derek backed her up. Teachers adored her, bosses trusted her, men obsessed over her, and every single time she crossed a line, somebody cleaned up the mess before consequences could touch her. But federal investigations don't care about family favorites. Evidence doesn't care who your parents love more. And prison definitely doesn't care about your MBA. Agent Thompson loosened his grip slightly once Victoria stopped struggling. "Miss Chin," he said calmly, "you need to cooperate." Victoria looked at him like she hated him personally. Then her eyes shifted back to me again. I'll never forget that look. Not sadness, not guilt, not heartbreak, just pure venom. Like somehow I was the monster for refusing to let her rob me. "You enjoyed this," she whispered. I shook my head slowly. "You have no idea how badly I wanted you to prove me wrong." That actually made her pause. For the first time all afternoon, Victoria looked uncertain. Because deep down, she knew I was telling the truth. I gave her chance after chance after chance. 3 entire years of chances, and every single time she chose greed. Mom suddenly stepped between us crying. "Enough!" Her voice cracked through the room. "Enough, both of you!" Then she turned toward me with tears running down her face. "You made your point, Emily. Please, don't do this." I stared at her quietly. "Don't do what?" "Destroy the family. There." It was again. Not, "Victoria committed fraud." Not, "Victoria betrayed you." Not, "Victoria should be accountable." No. Somehow the person exposing the crime always becomes more offensive than the person committing it. That's how toxic families survive. Truth becomes the enemy. I looked directly at my mother. Mom, she tried to steal from me twice. She made mistakes. She committed crimes. She's still your sister. And I was still hers when she lied to my clients. Mom broke down crying harder. Dad finally stood up slowly. Emily, his voice sounded exhausted. There has to be another way. I looked at him carefully. Like what? He opened his mouth, then stopped, because there wasn't another way. Not anymore. The evidence existed. The SEC was involved. Loan inquiries had been filed. Recorded conversations existed. Signed documents existed. This wasn't family drama anymore. It was federal criminal evidence, and everybody in the room knew it. Director Roberts checked her watch briefly. We need to leave. Victoria panicked instantly. No, wait! Agent Park stepped forward with handcuffs visible at his belt, and suddenly, reality hit everybody at once. Mom gasped loudly. Dad looked pale. Derek cursed under his breath. Victoria herself looked like she might faint, because this was no longer theoretical, no longer some argument, no longer manipulation. This was real. Federal. Agents, custody.charges.courtrooms, prison.victoria, breathing turned rapid. You can't arrest me. At this moment, Director Roberts clarified, you are being detained for questioning pending formal charges. But charges are coming, I added quietly. Victoria snapped toward me immediately. Shut up. Agent Thompson grabbed her arm again. Miss Chin, calm down. This is insane, she screamed. She created fake records. She built the company. Yes, Director Roberts replied calmly. And you knowingly attempted to leverage those records for financial gain. Victoria looked desperate now, like an animal trapped in a corner. You don't understand. I thought the company was real. Folded my arms. You reviewed fabricated revenue reports and immediately discussed securing financing against them. That's normal business. No, Roberts corrected sharply. What's normal is due diligence. That line hit hard because Victoria never actually cared whether the company was legitimate. She cared whether it looked profitable. Huge difference, and that difference was exactly why she was going down. Derek suddenly pointed at me angrily. You wanted this to happen. I looked at him calmly. No. Bullshit. His face was red now. You built the whole thing. Yes, I admitted. Because nobody listened the first time. Silence. That sentence landed like a bomb, because everybody remembered now. Thatcher, years earlier. The client complaint, Victoria's denial. My family instantly taking her side, Mom accusing me of jealousy, Dad saying I was too sensitive, Derek mocking me for being paranoid. Nobody asked for evidence. Nobody cared about facts. They just trusted Victoria automatically. And honestly, that betrayal hurt worse than the attempted theft itself. I looked around the room slowly. Do you know what it feels like? I asked quietly. When your entire family trusts the person hurting you more than they trust you? Nobody answered. Because they knew for the first time. They finally knew. Victoria suddenly looked at Mom desperately. Mom, please say something, Mom cried harder. Victoria, why? That one word shattered something in the room. Why, not denial anymore, not defense, not excuses, just heartbreak. Because even Mom couldn't protect her from reality now. Victoria looked stunned hearing it, like she genuinely expected unconditional. Rescue forever, and honestly, she probably did. That's what happens when someone spends their whole life escaping consequences. They stop believing consequences are real, until suddenly, they are. Victoria pointed at me again with shaking hands. She's lying about me. Director Roberts calmly opened another folder. No, actually. Then she pulled out printed screenshots, bank inquiries, loan discussions, financial summaries, Victoria's name everywhere. The room went dead silent. Dad stared at the paperwork helplessly. You already started applying. Victoria said nothing. Didn't. Deny it. Couldn't deny it. The proof was sitting right there. That's the thing about fraud. Eventually, paperwork tells the truth, and paperwork never gets emotional. Agent Park moved beside Victoria again. It's time. Victoria looked terrified now. Actually, terrified. Not angry, not manipulative, scared. And for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the first client she tried stealing, the gaslighting, the lies, the years of sabotage, the way she smiled while destroying my reputation. Inside my own family, and the sympathy disappeared, because this moment didn't happen suddenly. This moment was earned, slowly, deliberately, choice by choice, crime by crime. Victoria looked at me one last time. You ruined everything. I held her. Gaze steadily. No, I said quietly. You just finally ran out of people willing to save you. That one hit everybody hard, especially my parents, because deep down, they knew it was true. The agents began leading Victoria toward the front door. Mom collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Dad looked completely broken. Derek paced back and forth furiously. And me? I just stood there quietly watching years of lies, finally, collapse under their own weight. At the doorway, Director Roberts paused and turned toward me. Miss Chin? Yes? We'll need your formal statement tomorrow morning. I'll be there. She nodded once, then added something that shocked. My entire family. For what it's worth, she said, your documentation work was exceptional. The room went silent again. Director Roberts continued calmly. Most fraud victims never gather enough evidence for prosecution. What you did here was methodical, patient, and legally precise. Mom looked horrified hearing that. Like the government. Praising me somehow made this even more disturbing, but Roberts wasn't done. Honestly, she said, this operation will probably be used as a training example. Derek stared at me. A training example? Roberts nodded. Fraud patterns inside families are incredibly common. Victims are usually pressured emotionally into silence. Then she looked directly at my parents. Miss Emily Chin documented coercion, financial intent, fraudulent transfer behavior, and criminal escalation over a multi-year period. Dad couldn't even speak because for the first time in his life, someone important was validating me instead of Victoria, and he didn't know how to process it. The front door finally closed behind the agents, and just like that, Victoria was gone. No dramatic music, no screaming, no cinematic ending, just silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles into a room after something permanent happens. Mom cried softly into her hands. Derek looked furious. Dad looked numb, and I suddenly realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. For years, anger kept me going. Anger fueled the planning, the patience, the recordings, the strategy. But now, it was over. And underneath the anger, there was just exhaustion, emotional. Exhaustion so deep I could barely feel my legs. Derek suddenly turned toward me. How could you do this? I looked at him quietly. Interesting. What? You still think I'm the one who did something wrong? He stared at me in disbelief. You trapped your own sister. No. I shook my head slowly. I documented a criminal. She's family. And I was family too. That shut him up instantly, because there was no response to that. No defense, no excuse, just ugly truth, the kind nobody wants to say out loud. The silence after Derek stopped talking felt unbearable. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at each other anymore. It was like the illusion holding our family together had finally shattered. And now everyone was staring at the broken pieces, trying to figure out what was real. Mom sat at the dining table crying quietly into a napkin. Dad looked 10 years older than he had that morning. And Derek? He kept pacing like he wanted to blame someone, but couldn't figure out who anymore. That's the thing about truth. Once it finally enters the room, people start realizing how many lies they built their lives around, and that realization hurts. Lot. I slowly picked up my bag from beside the chair, the same chair they'd spent the last hour using to lecture me about accepting help. Funny how quickly things changed. Mom looked up suddenly. "You're leaving?" I nodded once. "There's nothing else to say." Her eyes filled with tears again. "There has to be." I looked at her quietly. "Mom, federal agents just took Victoria into custody for fraud." I paused. This isn't a misunderstanding anymore. She shook her head desperately. She didn't mean for this to happen. That sentence almost broke me. Not because it defended Victoria, because even now, even after everything, Mom still cared more about Victoria's intentions than my pain. Took a slow breath. "She meant to steal from me," I said calmly. Nobody argued, because nobody could. Dad finally stood up and walked toward the window. For a long moment, he just stared outside silently. Then finally he spoke. "I should have listened to you." The room froze. Those 5 words hit harder than the SEC raid, because it was the first genuine acknowledgement I'd received in years. I looked at him carefully. "When?" He closed his eyes briefly. "The first time." My throat tightened unexpectedly. 3 years. 3 years I waited to hear someone in my family admit that. 3 years of being treated like I was paranoid, jealous, emotional, difficult. And now suddenly, now they saw it. But honestly, it didn't feel as good as I imagined, because validation loses some of its magic when it arrives years too late. Dad turned toward me slowly. "She really tried to steal your client?" "Yes. And we—" He couldn't finish the sentence. But he didn't need to. We all knew. They helped her bury it. Not intentionally, maybe, but they did. That's the dangerous thing about favoritism. Sometimes people don't protect evil because they're malicious. Sometimes they protect it because admitting the truth would destroy the version of reality they feel comfortable living inside. And my family loved their version of Victoria. Successful, brilliant, perfect. Accepting who she actually was. That required them to question themselves too, and most people hate doing that. Derek finally stopped pacing. "You could have just cut her off," he muttered. I looked at him. I tried. "No, I mean really cut her off. Block her. Stay away. From her. You didn't have to—" He gestured around the room helplessly. "Do all this." I considered that carefully, then shook my head. "You still don't understand." "What?" "People like Victoria don't stop." Derek frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the first successful manipulation makes the second one easier." I stepped closer slowly. When someone lies, steals, manipulates, and faces 0 consequences— I paused. They escalate. Nobody interrupted me now, because suddenly they were all listening, actually listening, probably for the first time in my life. The first time she tried stealing from me, it was one client. I looked toward the front door where the agents had taken Victoria. This time it was fraudulent business transfers and fake loan leverage. I shrugged slightly. "What do you think comes next?" Nobody answered. Because deep down, they knew I was right. People don't become better after escaping consequences. They become bolder. Mom suddenly looked up again. But prison? Her voice cracked completely. She could go to prison. I looked at her quietly. Yes. Mom started crying harder. She's my daughter. And I'm your daughter too. That line broke something in Dad instantly. I saw it happen right in front of me. His face changed, like he was finally replaying years of moments through a different lens. Every time Victoria mocked me. Every time I tried speaking up. Every time they dismissed me. Every time they chose comfort over truth. He sat down slowly, like the weight of it all suddenly became too much. I failed both of you, he whispered. That surprised me, not because it wasn't true, because I never expected him to admit it. Mom looked shocked hearing him say it out loud. No? Yes, Dad interrupted softly. We did. Silence again. Heavy silence. Then Dad looked directly at me. You spent 3 years believing your own family trusted your sister more than you. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. My silence confirmed everything. Dad rubbed his face tiredly. And the worst part? He looked physically sick now. You were right. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Nobody moved. I pulled it out slowly. Unknown number. I already knew who it was before answering. Hello? A smooth, older male voice responded instantly. Miss Chin, this is Attorney Martin Goldstein representing your sister. Of course. Victoria already had a lawyer. People like her always prepare for consequences privately while pretending innocence publicly. What do you want? I asked calmly. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. There's no misunderstanding. My client was under emotional distress and she knowingly committed fraud. He paused briefly, then changed tactics immediately. Surely this can be resolved privately. There it was. The real reason for the call, not innocence. Damage control, classic rich people strategy. Handle crimes quietly before accountability becomes public. I looked around the room at my family listening carefully, then answered clearly enough. For everyone to hear, this is not a family disagreement. I paused. It's a federal criminal investigation. The lawyer's voice became colder. You're willing to destroy your own sister's future over a business dispute? I smiled slightly. No, I said calmly. She destroyed her future, over greed. Then I hung up. Nobody spoke after the call ended, but something had changed in the room, because hearing the lawyer talk made everything feel even more real. This wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't something Mom could smooth. Over with emotional guilt, Victoria was officially in legal survival mode now, and deep down, everyone knew she was probably going to lose. Derek looked at me carefully. You really won't help her? I stared at him in disbelief. She tried to ruin my life. She's still your sister. I shook my head slowly. You keep saying that like it magically erases what she did. He looked frustrated. You don't understand family. That actually made me laugh softly. No, I said. You don't understand accountability. That shut him up immediately, because that was the real issue here. Not love, not loyalty, accountability. My family believed family loyalty should protect people from consequences. I believed real love required honesty. Big difference. Mom wiped her tears shakily. What happens now? I answered honestly. Tomorrow I testify formally. Dad looked sick again. And after that? Victoria gets charged. Mom covered her mouth. Derek looked away. I continued quietly. Her lawyer will probably negotiate a plea deal? What if she refuses? Dad asked weakly. I shrugged. Then it goes to trial. The word trial hit the room like another explosion, because suddenly everyone imagined it. Courtrooms, evidence, recordings, Reporters, maybe. Public humiliation, years of hidden toxicity dragged into the open permanently. Mom whispered something under her breath. What? She looked at me with tears running down her face. We're going to lose her. I stared at her quietly for a long moment, then finally answered. No. My voice stayed calm. You lost her years ago. That line shattered the room completely, because everybody knew exactly what I meant. You don't suddenly become this manipulative overnight. People like Victoria spend years becoming who they are. Years lying. Years using people. Years believing. Consequences are optional, and families either stop them or accidentally help create them. Mine helped create them, and now everybody was finally paying the price for it, including me.